Picture this. Margaret Lawson stands in her kitchen doorway at 6:47 a.m., coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips, watching something that makes her question everything she knows about her 4-year-old orange tabby, Oliver. There, clenched carefully between his teeth, is what appears to be a tarnished silver coin, roughly the size of a quarter but noticeably thicker, with unfamiliar markings barely visible beneath layers of dark patina and dried mud. Oliver drops the coin at Margaret's feet with the same precision he usually reserves for the occasional dead mouse, then sits back on his haunches, green eyes fixed on her face with an expression of unmistakable pride. This is the 7th coin in 12 days, and what started as an amusing quirk has become an obsession that's beginning to consume both their lives. Margaret kneels down and picks up the coin, feeling its surprising weight in her palm. Unlike modern currency, this piece feels substantial, dense with age and history. The metal is cold against her skin, and she can make out what might be partial letters or symbols around the edge, though decades of exposure have rendered them nearly illegible. As a restoration specialist at the Metropolitan Museum's medieval collection, Margaret has handled countless historical artifacts, but she's never encountered anything quite like these coins in her own home. Each one Oliver has brought her appears to be hand-struck, with slight variations in thickness and markings that suggest they were made using techniques abandoned centuries ago. The pattern is always the same. Oliver disappears through his cat door around dawn, returns 2 to 3 hours later with a single coin, presents it to Margaret with ceremonial gravity, then spends the rest of the day sleeping off what appears to be significant physical exertion. His once pristine orange coat has become permanently stained with dirt and what looks like rust, and his paws show signs of repeated digging in rocky soil. Margaret had initially assumed Oliver was raiding some neighbor's lost jewelry box, or perhaps disturbing an old garden where previous homeowners had buried costume jewelry. But as she examined each coin under her professional-grade magnifying equipment, she began to realize these weren't modern reproductions or tourist trinkets. The metalwork showed techniques consistent with medieval European currency, possibly dating back 400 to 500 years. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Margaret's Victorian cottage in the historic district of Millbrook, New York, casting delicate shadows across her hardwood floors as she made her routine inspection of Oliver's latest discovery. Everything had been perfectly normal until 12 days ago, when she'd found the first coin waiting for her beside her morning newspaper. It was a Tuesday morning in mid-October when Margaret first observed Oliver's unusual behavior. She was grading papers for the art history course she taught part-time at the local college, preparing for a lecture on medieval craftsmanship, when Oliver strutted through the cat door with an unmistakable air of accomplishment. This wasn't entirely unusual. Oliver was an active outdoor cat who regularly brought home evidence of his hunting expeditions. But there was something different about his demeanor that morning, something deliberate about the way he approached her desk and carefully deposited his prize. The first coin was encrusted with so much dirt that Margaret initially mistook it for a large button or perhaps a metal washer from some construction project. It wasn't until she cleaned it under running water that the unmistakable gleam of silver began to emerge, along with traces of what appeared to be hand-engraved text. After several hours of careful cleaning with tools from her restoration kit, Margaret managed to reveal enough detail to confirm her suspicions. This was definitely a silver coin, and unless someone was producing incredibly sophisticated reproductions and burying them in local soil for decades to achieve authentic aging, she was looking at a piece of genuine historical currency. Margaret tried to dismiss her growing excitement, reminding herself that upstate New York was full of historical sites where artifacts occasionally surfaced after heavy rains or construction projects. But when Oliver returned the next morning with a second coin, then a third the day after that, she knew she was dealing with something extraordinary. Dr. James Whitmore, her colleague from the museum's numismatics department, agreed to examine the coins during his lunch break. Margaret met him at the faculty lounge of Millbrook College, carrying the 7 coins in a padded jewelry box she'd borrowed from her personal collection. "These are remarkable," Dr. Whitmore said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he studied the coins under a portable UV light. The silver content appears to be consistent with 16th century European minting, possibly Spanish or Dutch colonial. The craftsmanship is exceptional, and the patination patterns suggest they've been buried in acidic soil for centuries. He looked up at Margaret with an expression of barely contained excitement. Where exactly did you say your cat was finding these? That's the problem, Margaret replied, feeling a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. I have no idea. Oliver leaves every morning around dawn and returns a few hours later with 1 coin. He's never brought me anything like this before, and I can't figure out where he's going. Dr. Whitmore frowned as he continued his examination. Margaret, if these are authentic, and everything I'm seeing suggests they are, we could be looking at a significant archaeological discovery. A cache of 16th-century silver coins buried in this area could provide crucial insights into early colonial trade routes and settlement patterns. The implications sent a chill down Margaret's spine. If Oliver had somehow located an undisturbed historical site, his daily excavations could be destroying crucial archaeological context. Every artifact needed to be documented in its original position to maintain scientific value. Random collection, even by a well-meaning cat, could render the entire discovery archaeologically worthless. That evening, Margaret found herself sitting on her back porch in the growing darkness, watching Oliver's silhouette as he prowled the edges of her property, his movements purposeful and alert. The rhythmic sound of him sharpening his claws on the old oak tree echoed through the quiet neighborhood, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial, something that would explain this sudden shift in his behavior. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Whitmore. Have you considered contacting the state archaeologist? If Oliver has found a colonial-era cache, there could be legal implications for excavation and preservation. As she watched Oliver disappear into the darkness beyond her fence line, Margaret made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would follow him, no matter how far he traveled or how difficult the terrain. Something was drawing her cat to a specific location with remarkable consistency, and she was determined to understand what it was before any more archaeological context was lost. The tracking expedition began at 5:30 a.m. on a crisp Thursday morning. Margaret had prepared meticulously, wearing her most comfortable hiking boots, carrying a backpack stocked with water, energy bars, her digital camera, GPS device, and professional documentation supplies. She'd also brought along a small folding shovel and evidence bags, just in case she needed to secure any artifacts Oliver might disturb. Oliver seemed unusually alert as he approached his cat door, pausing to look back at Margaret with what appeared to be curiosity about her early morning preparations. When she opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch, the orange tabby sat down and began grooming his front paw, apparently waiting for her to make the first move. All right, buddy, Margaret whispered, adjusting her backpack straps. Show me where you've been going. The trail led immediately away from Margaret's residential neighborhood, through a gap in the hedge that separated her property from the undeveloped woodland behind the historic district. Oliver moved with confident purpose, following what appeared to be deer paths through dense undergrowth, occasionally pausing to ensure Margaret was keeping up. Within 20 minutes, they had traveled nearly 2 miles from her house, moving steadily uphill through increasingly wild terrain. Margaret recognized the area as part of the old Whitmore estate, a 200-acre parcel that had been donated to the state as protected woodland in the 1960s. The land had remained largely untouched since colonial times, which made Oliver's destination even more intriguing from an archaeological perspective. The forest was beautiful in the early morning light, with towering maple and oak trees creating a cathedral-like canopy overhead. Margaret found herself appreciating the peaceful silence broken only by Oliver's occasional chirping calls and the distant sound of a creek flowing somewhere ahead. After 45 minutes of steady hiking, Oliver led her to a small clearing where the remains of a stone foundation were barely visible beneath decades of fallen leaves and undergrowth. Margaret's heart began racing as she realized they were standing at what had once been a building site, possibly dating back to the area's earliest European settlement. Oliver approached a specific section of the foundation, where large stones had partially collapsed, creating a depression filled with loose soil and leaf mold. Without hesitation, he began digging with the focused intensity Margaret had observed during his morning hunting expeditions. Within minutes, his careful excavation had revealed the unmistakable glint of silver. Margaret watched in amazement as Oliver extracted another coin from the earth, shook the dirt from his whiskers, and presented it to her with the same ceremonial pride she'd witnessed in her kitchen. But this time, Margaret was positioned to see what Oliver had uncovered. In the small pit he'd created, the morning sunlight illuminated what appeared to be the edge of a much larger metallic object, possibly a container or strongbox that had been buried beneath the foundation stones. Margaret's professional training kicked in immediately. This was potentially a major archaeological discovery, requiring careful documentation and expert excavation techniques. She began photographing the site from multiple angles, recording GPS coordinates, and making detailed notes about the position of each visible artifact. As she worked, Oliver continued his digging, but with obvious frustration. His small paws and limited strength were inadequate for the large-scale excavation needed to reveal whatever was buried beneath the foundation. Margaret realized that Oliver had been bringing her individual coins not out of random collecting behavior, but as evidence of something much larger that he lacked the ability to fully uncover. "You've been trying to show me this place, haven't you?" she said softly, scratching behind Oliver's ears as he sat beside the partially excavated site. "You knew there was something important here, and you've been bringing me proof, one piece at a time." The emergency response was swift and professional. Within 3 hours of Margaret's call to the state archaeologist's office, Dr. Elena Rodriguez and her graduate student team had arrived at the site with ground-penetrating radar and professional excavation equipment. Using non-invasive scanning techniques, they confirmed what Oliver had somehow detected weeks earlier. Buried beneath the collapsed foundation was a wooden chest containing what appeared to be several hundred silver coins, along with other metallic objects that could be jewelry, tools, or documents preserved in metal containers. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Rodriguez explained as her team set up a grid system around the excavation site. Ground-penetrating radar shows the chest is positioned at the exact center of what was probably the building's main room. Someone deliberately buried this cache before abandoning the site, possibly during King Philip's War in the 1670s when many colonial settlements were evacuated. Margaret felt a surge of pride as she watched Oliver supervising the archaeological team's work from a comfortable position on one of the foundation stones. Her cat had accomplished something that professional surveys had missed for over 300 years. His daily hunting expeditions had led him to detect metallic objects buried 6 feet underground, then systematically brought evidence to the one person in his life who would recognize their historical significance. The excavation took 3 full days, with Margaret serving as both site documentation specialist and official liaison between the archaeological team and Oliver, who had apparently appointed himself chief supervisor of the project. The orange tabby remained at the site throughout the dig, occasionally offering assistance by pawing at loose soil or sitting on equipment that needed to be moved. When the wooden chest was finally lifted from its centuries-old hiding place, the contents exceeded everyone's expectations. Along with 342 silver coins dating from 1580 to 1670, the cache contained a collection of silver jewelry, 2 pewter plates, a brass compass, and most remarkably, a collection of documents wrapped in oiled leather that had preserved them in near-perfect condition. The documents revealed the cache's origin and significance. Johannes van der Berg, a Dutch trader who had established a trading post on the site in 1665, had buried his most valuable possessions when indigenous attacks forced evacuation of the area during King Philip's War. His detailed inventory, written in Dutch and Latin, provided historians with unprecedented insights into colonial trade networks and the daily life of European settlers in 17th-century New York. The story spread through academic journals and local media, transforming from a simple case of unusual pet behavior into a celebration of animal intelligence and archaeological discovery. Photos of Oliver posed beside the excavation site appeared in Archaeology magazine, accompanied by articles about the importance of citizen reporting and the unexpected ways historical discoveries sometimes surface. Dr. Rodriguez published a detailed paper about the find in the Journal of American Colonial History, dedicating a section to Oliver's role in the discovery and arguing for greater attention to animal behavior patterns near historical sites. "We must consider the possibility," she wrote, "that domestic animals may be detecting archaeological sites through sensory capabilities we don't fully understand, and their behavior changes could serve as early indicators of significant discoveries. 6 months after the excavation, Margaret stood once again in her kitchen, watching Oliver execute his morning routine with the satisfaction of a cat who had successfully completed a major project. The orange tabby had shown no interest in returning to the excavation site since the professional team had removed all the artifacts. Apparently, his work was done. The Vanderburg collection, as it had been officially designated, was now housed at the New York State Museum in Albany, where it served as the centerpiece of an exhibition about colonial trade and settlement patterns. A special plaque acknowledged Oliver's contribution to the discovery, and the museum had even commissioned a small bronze statue of an orange tabby to display alongside the artifacts. Margaret's cottage had become a minor pilgrimage destination for both archaeologists and cat enthusiasts, all eager to meet the famous feline who had uncovered a 300-year-old treasure. But Oliver seemed unimpressed by his celebrity status, returning to his previous routine of hunting mice and napping in sunny windows. The discovery had transformed Margaret's career as well. Her first-hand experience with citizen archaeology and animal behavior patterns had led to a consulting position with the State Historical Preservation Office, and she found herself traveling throughout New York, training local communities to recognize signs of potential archaeological sites. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in Margaret's daily relationship with Oliver. Each morning as she prepared for work, she spent extra time observing his behavior, not just for signs of mischief or health issues, but listening. Really listening to what his actions might be telling her about their shared environment. Oliver had taught her that discovery comes in many forms, and sometimes the most important archaeological finds are revealed not through expensive equipment or systematic surveys, but through the patient, persistent behavior of a creature following instincts we don't fully understand. The cat who had once brought home silver coins as gifts now spent his days in peaceful contentment, secure in the knowledge that his message had finally been understood. And Margaret had learned that sometimes the greatest act of historical preservation is simply recognizing that our animal companions might notice things we do not, and having the wisdom to follow when they try to lead us toward discovery. If you've ever had a pet whose unusual behavior led to an unexpected discovery, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Sometimes our animal friends are trying to show us something important, and sharing these stories helps us all become better observers of the world around us. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of animal intelligence and the remarkable ways our pets continue to surprise and teach us. Until next time, remember that treasure comes in all forms, even when it's delivered one muddy paw at a time.